my name's Anneke. I run marketing and operations at a little startup called Reserve, and we're still pretty new, so I can give you guys a little background on us. We are a digital concierge service, so we take care of everything in the dining process, from making recommendations on where to eat, to helping you to get a reservation, all the way through to taking care of payment. So when you're done with your meal, you just get up and you go when you're ready. It's actually a really, really cool experience. Feels really seamless, effortless, feels a lot like Uber for restaurants. And as I say that, I realize that that is like one of the biggest cliches you could possibly say. To say that you're the Uber for something is like really big Silicon Valley BS right now. And I'm also aware that a lot of you guys are thinking like, ugh, restaurant tech, right? Like, aren't there like 100 companies trying to do something in this space? How is there any room for growth in a space that's that crowded? Like, what am I possibly going to learn from this company? And that's exactly why I'm here, actually, is because I want to talk about how you can launch into a really crowded space and launch with a bang. Because getting a strong launch right out of the door is what's going to put you on a trajectory to be able to take advantage of all the great tools that you guys are going to learn about and have been learning about here today at WMD. Obviously, Reserve is a lot younger than a lot of the other companies that are up here speaking today, but in the few short months since we launched, we've nearly doubled the number of markets that we're in, and we have a really great user base that is just growing like crazy month over month. So what I wanted to do today was just share some stories with you guys about the stuff that we've learned so far at Reserve, and then maybe wrap with a few just kind of key takeaways that I think any of you could take back to your own companies and products. So I want to start back before I joined Reserve. I was at the Google Creative Lab, which is this sort of little secret lair inside of Google where a bunch of technologists and designers and animators get together and sort of like dream up what is the future of technology. And so the Creative Lab is sort of known for being this great breeding ground for new ideas in tech. And I learned this really, really cool tool there for pressure testing new ideas. So bear with me, it's a little counterintuitive. Usually when you're thinking about launch, you're thinking about how great your product is going to be, right? That is just going to be like God's gift to the mobile phone and like solve everybody's problems all the time. And that is all well and good. You definitely need to plan like what the value prop is and how you're going to market your product. But what I did at the lab was actually something completely opposite, which is you sit down and you write every single one of the worst and meanest headlines you can possibly think about your product and your idea. And this process allows you to really dig into what are all the piles of crap that you are about to step into that you could potentially avoid stepping into and set yourself up for some better success. So before Reserve launched, before we really had anything, I sat down and went through this process, and these are the headlines that I wrote. Yet another startup wants to try to do something in the crowded restaurant space. I think we've probably actually seen headlines like this. And the big takeaway for me on this one was that even if you think you're doing something really cool and unique, if you're entering into a crowded space, the fact that you are trying to do something is not news. It is not interesting to anyone else because everyone else is also trying to do something. And so that was something that we really took to heart as we thought about sort of what our strategy was going to be for launching Reserve. The second one is sort of like a fake quote from an investor. Company could be cool, interested to see what they do. This is sort of in the similar vibe, right? And we see this all the time. When a company launches, they're able to round up a few investors or sort of influential folks who have quotes like this that are like sort of positive, but also like just kind of speculative. And what they end up doing is contributing to this like wait and see vibe, and that is not a vibe that sets you up for like hyper growth at all. So I was really determined to make sure we did not have any headlines like this when Reserve launched. And then this last one is probably a little snarkier than anyone would really write, except maybe Ballywag. Company launches in one city. Maybe they'll make it to the other coast. But I think this one was really important, right? Especially with like a city-driven product like ours. You have to start somewhere. But to launch in just one city didn't really seem like it was big news, right? Like you haven't really fully vetted whether this is a great idea and is going to work on both coasts or even, all across the country or potentially internationally. So this was something that we thought about a lot, that like kind of just saying, hey, we're trying something in one city, again, contributed to this like wait and see thing that we wanted to avoid. So okay, we sort of went through this process, and then we thought about how we were going to prepare for our launch. So as with any good company that's pre-launch, we put up a splash page, got ourselves a killer domain name, and this is what we had up. And this was before we really had built out our alpha and beta product, but you can see from sort of the imagery that we picked and the copy that we picked that we sort of shared a little bit about what we were working on. So it was enough to kind of drum up interest without tipping too many of our cards. And this was really, really important, right? Is like letting people know that clearly you're doing something related to reservations in the restaurant space. It made it so that all of the journalists and reporters that cover this beat, right, that cover restaurants and tech and food, sort of knew they needed to pay attention to us, but it wasn't so much that we were getting ourselves on the line for having our product totally locked. Because as we went through the process of our alpha and beta tests, we really wanted to make sure that we were pressure testing our app and our concept in as many places as we could. So it was a natural place for us to want to start in New York City. That's where the company is based. And it's this sort of natural jumping off point for all restaurant tech. Really, really crowded market there in New York. So of course, we were going to do it there. But we made the strategic decision to also run our private beta in Los Angeles and Boston. And the reason we did that was those are three very, very different markets, different sizes, different types of people, really different restaurant scene. And so we wanted to make sure that this was something that was going to work across all of those spaces, and that we could iron out a lot of the kinks in the product across all of these different markets. So as we were starting to build out this private beta, we knew that we really wanted to get great feedback about the product. And so we thought carefully about who do we sort of want to let into the circle of trust while we're iterating on the product. And there were kind of two categories of people. One was sort of like investors and folks that were influential in the tech space. This was a little bit risky because as you're iterating on the product, it's tough to let influential people in and potentially disappoint them. But it was something where we strategically set it up so that they understood that they kind of had this exclusive access. They were going to give us feedback, and we were going to be able to iterate to make a product that was going to work for them. And this ended up being great for us. We had a Fortune 10 executive who was one of our first alpha testers in New York City. Chris Sacca sent us pages of, in some cases, scathing feedback during his first few times using the product. But what it meant was that we were able to learn from that, improve the product, and so by the time we launched, we had this kind of cadre of influential people who had already used the app multiple times and were sort of prepared to speak about it in a meaningful way. But there's only so many of those type of people, and also those type of people are only one segment of the market. And so we thought a little bit further of how do we open up the private beta to more people without having to widen this circle of trust and let too many more people know what we're working on. And so we did something that I thought was actually really cool, which is we invited all of our restaurant partners into the private beta. And this was everybody from the celebrity chefs all the way down to the busboys. We gave them an exclusive invitation to join us in the private beta and give us feedback about what their experience was like. This was not only awesome because they got to see, from the diner's perspective, what it was like to go through the process of using Reserve, but it also just bought us a lot of goodwill and made them better partners, ultimately, when we did launch. Partnering really deeply with restaurants is core to our DNA, and so it just made sense that we would want to bring them in during this period. So we get through our private beta, we learn a lot, we're in a good position in these 3 cities, and we launch, and it goes really, really well. And we have all these people who can sort of talk about what their experience with Reserve actually is. We are actually up and running in these cities. So to get back to what I was talking about with the headlines, I didn't want the headline to be, Reserve's going to try something in one city. By the time we launched, I wanted it to be, holy shit, Reserve's already doing it in 3 cities. It's all happening. And to kind of have that trajectory help keep kind of like a rolling conversation about the company where we didn't have to wait another 6 months to launch our 4th city, that San Francisco came online just 6 weeks later. And then 6 weeks after that, our first restaurant in Chicago came on board. And so we've been able to kind of keep up this momentum, and a lot of that comes from the way that we strategized our launch. As we started to come out of launch, I think one thing that we planned before the launch was to think about supply and demand. So we're definitely a marketplace company, and one of the things that we were keenly aware of was being a concierge meant that we were in the business of helping our diners get seated at great restaurants, get great recommendations, taking care of the check. We were not in the business of doubling the square footage and staff of a very small restaurant like Flour and Water. which many of you guys probably know is like one of the most popular restaurants here in San Francisco. And so we thought a lot about, okay, when we launch, if this goes well, we want to have a lot of attention and people, coming to us and being interested. But we can't have 100,000 people all request to eat at Flower and Water this Friday at 8 p.m. Like, that's going to be not a great experience for any of those diners. And frankly, it's going to be a pretty bad experience for our restaurant partners to have something like that happen. So we made the decision to put up a wait list when we first launched. And I want to talk about wait lists for a second, because I know they can be a little bit controversial. And I'd say the best advice that I can give is if you're going to use a wait list, make sure you know exactly why you're doing it. I think if you're doing it just for show, people are going to see through that really, really quickly, and they're going to be unhappy. A company that did, I think, a really good job with it is Mailbox. I don't know if you guys remember when they came out. They were pretty slow about letting people in. I mean, I guess maybe it seemed fast for them, but I know a lot of us were waiting around for what felt like a long time. But they were really clear with everybody about why they were waiting, that they had to make sure that their servers could handle all of that interest. We, too, needed to make sure that our servers could handle all of that interest. And so we did use this wait list in the early days to make sure that we nailed it on the experience for our early diners. Because for us, technology was only secondary to the experience that we were creating. And we really needed to make sure that the early people and the restaurants had a great experience with that. That said, we took down the wait list as fast as we possibly could. And that would be my second piece of advice with wait lists, is do not keep them up a second longer than you need to have them. Because they slow growth unnecessarily if you're in that situation. So the last thing I want to talk about is sort of like a surprise insight for us, which is when we were going through our private beta process, we initially had this plan for Reserve that it was going to be just like dining and dashing, right? Like you eat and then you just leave, you don't have to deal with the check at all. And all of our sort of like Uber power users totally got that concept and loved it. But the more people we let into the private beta, the more we found this actually made for kind of an awkward experience. That people were sort of like lingering at the table, they weren't sure if they were allowed to leave. And then our restaurant partners were saying the same thing. They were like, do we say goodbye, or we're not really sure? So we're like, oh God, we actually have to solve for this. We have to do something here. And then we also got some feedback from folks that wanted to see an itemized receipt, before they got charged. So we said, okay, well, maybe we should have the server drop off an itemized receipt. And they can say something like, thank you so much for dining with us. You're all set. Here's an itemized receipt if you need it for your records. But we found that it is such an ingrained behavior that when a server comes and drops off a receipt, that you immediately begin the song and dance of searching through your purse, getting your credit card, figuring out who's going to pay, how you're going to split it. And that whole feeling was something that we wanted to completely eliminate. Like, the magic of Reserve was supposed to be in that moment of being like, ta-da, like, this is awesome. And so how do we preserve that moment and allow for this moment where the check gets dropped off? We're like, well, can we just like print little cards that say the check is paid, and so you don't have to pull out your card? And maybe we put our logo on there, and it can be like this nice little thing. So we sort of stumbled across this as what we thought like kind of a hacky solution to some of the challenges we were seeing. And what really took us by surprise was how much these little cards just took off. That when we launched, it sort of like became this little product meme that on Twitter and Instagram, people were sharing photos of these cards. And it sort of became this badge of honor for the Reserve initiated. That people who got this card wanted to show it to their friends, and then their friends wanted to go and get that card. And on the rare occasion that a restaurant would run out of cards or would like forget to drop it off, people would write into customer service and be like, I never got my card, I'm so bummed. And so this just ended up being a really cool opportunity for us to kind of reinforce some of the value of the brand, but also drive growth through people that are having that experience. That like right at that moment where something's awesome is happening, that they remember like why they're having that awesome moment and then want to share it with people. So, a few of the insights that I wanted to share with you guys. This first one, that while you are pre-launch, be private, but not overly precious. And this was something I think that was really helpful for us in being clear what space we were in and kind of giving hints about what we were building. We were able to lay the groundwork for a really big announcement when we finally did come out of the gate. I'm sure we've all seen there's startups that are like in super stealth, where it's like they have a really vague name, like a really vague website, and it's like, we're building the innovative technology for everyone. And you're like, cool, but I don't even, like, I'll check back later to find out what you do. And so by the time you launch, it's like this game of catch up to figure out like who actually would have been interested in the thing they're launching. So to anyone in the room who's getting ready to launch, I would say, don't be overly precious with your stealth period. Also, probably don't use the word stealth. It's really annoying. Second insight, withhold press until you have real news. This one is the hardest, guys, because those of us who are entrepreneurs in the room, like, it is your baby, it is beautiful, and everything that it does is amazing, and you think that everyone should have a headline about it. But as it turns out, not everyone is as interested in what you are interested in when it comes to your company. And so I really strongly encourage you all to think carefully about, you only get one chance to like come out of the gates in the press, so make sure you wait until you have something really meaningful to share before you kind of like waste all that. The third is engaging your partners as early users, and this is really key for anyone that's building kind of like a marketplace or a, demand and supply connecting type of company. Is especially if the experience for your user is more key than your technology. Make sure that the partners that you're partnering with to deliver that experience are really bought in from the early days. And it's also a great way to sort of like get their buy-in and insight before you go wide to a larger audience. And then the last insight was just creating these branded shareable moments can be a great way to sort of instill FOMO in people, right? Like, we had people who were like, what's that card? Like, I want to get one. And it's a great way to sort of like put your stamp on a crowded space and show that like you're here to stay. And I just want to share an example that's actually not Reserve related. Is there anyone in the room who uses TimeHop? Yes, a few hands, okay. So this is actually like a great app. You hook it up to like your Instagram, your Twitter, your Facebook, and it tells you every day, last year, the year before, years back, what you posted that day. It's really, really fun. I use it every day and look through it. It can be very funny, and it can also be very emotional. It's just like a great little app. But I ran into the founder a few weeks ago in New York City, and I was asking him, I said, hey, I remember back in like 2010, 2011, there were a lot of companies in that space trying to like curate your digital memories and like help take you down that like walk down memory lane. But it seems that today, like TimeHop has really won, like that they are the big guys in that space. I asked him why he thought they were able to do that. And he said that it had to do with a lot of little UX and UI decisions they made in the app, and one of which is that they found so many people would screenshot things from the app and send it to their friends, right? And be like, oh my gosh, remember when we had hair like that? That's great. And so when you screenshot an image from TimeHop, there's like a little TimeHop logo in the top corner. And as soon as he said it, I was like, oh my God, you're right. That is why I use TimeHop, because so many of my friends were screenshotting and sending me photos. And I was like, what is this TimeHop thing? I feel like I need to get on board. So anyway, again, these little, figure out ways where you're going to create a moment that people want to share, and finding an opportunity to brand that, I think is really cool. And so I want to close with this one last story. It's actually very similar to the story that Michelle shared earlier. Just I had a friend send me an email the other day, or he's forwarding me a message from his mom. And his mom was responding to a message she got from one of her friends where they were just raving about Reserve and what a great experience it was. And they even included this line like, it's so cool, you get this little card at the end that says that it's paid. It's fantastic, in like all caps. And so when we talk about launching tech companies, we focus a lot on kind of like the young, hip, tech-savvy kids in the big cities. But when someone's mom in suburban Boston is, writing to her friends about your product, like that's when it really starts to feel like you're onto something. So that's all I've got today. Thank you so much, you guys. Feel free to come up afterwards and chat.